He's a good guy, and we have a great understanding of each other. We're great friends. Now, he's a very complex, involved person. I never get tired of him.
The 19th of January, 2026. Dolly Parton turns 80 years old. She has sold more than 100 million records since her first album in 1967. She has 11 Grammy Awards. She has 3 Emmys. She was given an honorary Academy Award in 2025 for her humanitarian work. She has a catalog of songs that other people keep making famous all over again, decade after decade, and a career that began when she cut her first single in 1959 at the age of 13. And she spends that 80th birthday as a widow, 11 months after the death of the man she had been married to since 1966, and about 62 years after she met him outside a laundromat on her first day in Nashville. 5 people. That is what this video is about. The 5 people Dolly Parton has loved most, drawn from 3 memoirs, 60 years of interviews, and a lifetime of saying the same names over and over to anybody who asked. Not Kenny Rodgers, who sang Islands in the Stream with her in 1983 and stayed a friend for 40 years. Not Whitney Houston, who took a song Dolly wrote and turned it into one of the best-selling singles ever released by a woman. Not Miley, who is her goddaughter. Not Elvis. Not Jane Fonda or Lily Tomlin, who made 9 to 5 with her in 1980. Not one of the enormous names attached to her records, her films, or her 60 years in public life. 5 names in her order. And the one at the top is a man who, in nearly 60 years of marriage to the most famous woman in country music, watched his wife perform exactly once. If that voice was ever on in your kitchen, a tap of the like button puts her in front of somebody else who remembers. There is a question worth settling before the countdown starts, because a list like this can be assembled dishonestly very easily. Nobody sat down with Dolly Parton and asked her to rank the people she loves. There is no interview where she counts them off, and this video is not going to pretend otherwise. What there is instead is 60 years of the most quoted woman in country music saying the same 5 names, in public, without being pushed. She has written 3 books about her own life. She published Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business in 1994 and Songteller in 2020, and she has given more interviews across more decades than almost any performer alive. Across the whole of that record, the books, the songs, the television, the press junkets, 60 years of being asked questions, the same small handful of people keep arriving. They turn up in the memoirs, they turn up in the lyrics, and they turn up in the answers to questions that were about something else entirely, which is the part that makes the pattern trustworthy. Nobody was asking her about these 5. She kept bringing them up. Everything in the next half hour comes from that. There is no anonymous source anywhere in this video, no friend of the family, and nothing that has not been said either by her or by a wire service reporting on the record. She is 80 years old. She is a widow of 18 months. She has had the hardest year of her adult life, and she has been characteristically open about that as well, which this video will come back to at the end, using her words and nobody else's. Which is why the order is worth arguing with, and why the top of the list is not who anybody would guess. Number 5. Judy Ogle. They met in the 3rd grade, in a schoolroom in East Tennessee, sometime in the mid-1950s. Their parents knew each other. They grew up in the same rural country, in the same poverty, and by Dolly's own description, in a 2019 interview, the 2 of them were like sisters, more or less immediately. Best friends, she said then, for 64 years, since they were little kids. That is 70 years ago now, and Judy Ogle is still there. Consider what that has actually involved, because it is not a friendship that stayed in Tennessee while one of them left. When Dolly Parton became famous in 1967, Judy Ogle went with her. She traveled with her for decades. She worked as her assistant, and by Dolly's own account in her 1994 memoir, the job was considerably larger than that title suggests. The valet, the hairdresser, the makeup artist, whatever the day happened to require, on the road for years at a stretch. She also went with her to remote places when the work needed silence, so that the most recognizable woman in country music could write somewhere nobody would find her. And then there is the writing, which is where this entry actually earns its place on the list. Dolly Parton has described the songwriting process as an intensely private thing, best done alone. And then she added the exception, which is the whole of this entry, that being with Judy is better than being alone. When she moved to Los Angeles for work, she would telephone Tennessee and ask whether Judy could come. Judy came. She stayed as long as she was needed, sat with her through the writing, and made sure she ate. There is a second thing Judy Ogle did which almost nobody knows about, and which turns out to matter enormously. She kept everything: the costumes, the shoes, the hats, the fan art that arrived by the sackful for 50 years. When the Grand Ole Opry mounted an exhibition in 2019 to mark Dolly Parton's 50 years as a member, the reason there was anything to put in the cases is that Judy Ogle had been quietly archiving all of it since the beginning. Her niece and her creative director both said so publicly at that opening. Judy had been adamant for decades that the things be stored properly. The most documented woman in country music has a personal archive because her friend from the 3rd grade decided in about 1970 that somebody ought to look after it. In June 2026, on National Best Friends Day, Dolly Parton posted a photograph of the two of them and wrote about what Judy had meant to her, that she had carried a piece of Tennessee with her the whole way, that she had traveled with her and worked for her, and been there whenever she was needed, and that there had been an enormous amount of laughing. 70 years. From a 3rd grade classroom in East Tennessee in the mid-1950s to an Instagram post in June 2026. The most famous woman in country music has had the same best friend since before she could read music, and neither of them has ever given the other one a reason to stop. Number 4. Porter Wagoner. This is the difficult one, and it is going to be told with both halves intact because telling only one of them would be dishonest in either direction. In 1967, Porter Wagoner was one of the biggest stars in country music, and he had a nationally syndicated television program carrying his own name into millions of American homes every week. He needed a new female singer. The woman who had been doing the job, Norma Jean, was leaving. So he hired a 21-year-old from the Smokies who had been in Nashville for 3 years and had written a few songs for other people. And he put her on that show every single week from 1967 onward. That is how America met Dolly Parton. She has never once pretended otherwise in 60 years, and that is worth registering before the rest of this entry arrives. Porter Wagoner made her famous. The 7 years she spent on that program, from 1967 to 1974, took a songwriter who had been in Nashville for 3 years and no more, and turned her into a name in every household with a television. He also recorded with her constantly across that period, and the duets were among the most successful in the format. And then she wanted to leave. By the early 1970s, she had her own hits, her own audience, and her own ambitions, and the arrangement that had made her had turned into the thing holding her in place. That happens with a great many mentor relationships in that business, and it almost never ends well. Porter Wagoner did not want to let her go. What she did about it is the single most extraordinary thing in this video. She wrote him a song. I Will Always Love You is not a romance, and it was never written as one. It is a resignation letter. It is a young woman telling the man who built her career that she is going, that she is grateful for all of it, that she does not want to fight about it, and that she will love him regardless of how he takes the news. Listen to it again with that in your head, and every line of it changes. It is not somebody leaving a lover. It is somebody leaving a job and being extraordinarily careful about the feelings of the man she is leaving it to. Her account of what happened next has been consistent for 50 years. She took it into his office, and she sang it to him. And when he had heard the whole thing, Porter Wagoner cried. And then he told her that if that was how she felt about it, she could go. That song went to #1 on the country chart twice for her, in 1974 and again in 1982 for the film The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And then in 1992, Whitney Houston recorded it for The Bodyguard, and it became one of the best-selling singles ever released by a woman anywhere in the world, and spent 14 weeks at #1 in the United States. Every one of those millions of copies is, at the root of it, a goodbye letter to Porter Wagoner. There are people in every country on earth who have that record at their weddings and at their funerals. Effectively, none of them know that the original was written by a young woman trying to get out of a television contract without breaking the heart of the man who had given her the job in the first place. The parting was not clean afterwards, and this video is not going to pretend it was. He sued her. That is a matter of public record. There was litigation over the business arrangements between them. It was bitter, and it went on for years. And it happened after the song, which tells you that the song did not settle everything the way the story usually gets told. And then they repaired it. Over the following decades, the two of them worked their way back to something genuine. They performed together again. She spoke about him with warmth and with precision, and she has never at any point tried to write him out of the story of how she arrived. That is not nothing. A great many people in that position spend the rest of their lives editing the mentor out of the biography. Porter Wagoner died in October 2007 at 79. Dolly Parton was there. She has said since that she was with him near the end, that they talked, and that whatever had happened between them in the courts 30 years earlier, the affection underneath all of it had survived the whole thing intact. 40 years from the day he hired her to the day she sat with him. That is the entry. A man who made her, who would not release her, who sued her, who forgave and was forgiven, and who is the reason the most successful song by a woman in recorded history exists at all. Number 3. Robert Lee Parton Sr., her father. He was born in 1921, and he died in 2000, and for the whole of his working life, he was a subsistence farmer and a construction worker in the mountains of East Tennessee. He and his wife raised 12 children on almost nothing. Dolly Parton was the fourth of those 12. The family lived in a one-room cabin in the Smokies, and the poverty was not the picturesque kind that gets put on album covers afterwards. It was cold. It was frequently hungry. There was no running water and no electricity for much of it, and it was entirely ordinary for that part of East Tennessee in the 1940s and 1950s, which is the part that gets lost. The Partons were not unusually poor. They were normally poor, in a place where that meant what it meant. And Robert Lee Parton could not read or write. That is the fact this entry turns on, and she has never hidden it or dressed it up. Her father was illiterate. He signed with a mark. He could not read a road sign, a contract, or a letter from a school. And she has said consistently, in every decade since he died, and for a good while before it, that Robert Lee Parton was the smartest man she ever knew. Not the kindest or the hardest working, although she has said both of those things about him too. The smartest, a man who could not read a word, who ran a farm, raised 12 children through the 1940s and 1950s, worked construction, held a household together, and navigated the entire 20th century without the one skill that century assumed everybody had. She has been explicit about what she thinks that means, that intelligence and literacy are two different things, and that her father had a great deal of the first and none of the second, and that the world had no way of telling the difference. Now here is what she did about it. The Imagination Library sends free books to children by post once a month, from birth until they start school. It began in 1995 in Sevier County, Tennessee, her father's county, and it has since given away hundreds of millions of books to children across the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Australia. She started it because of him, and she has said so every time she has been asked about it for 30 years. The whole point of it, the reason it posts the books rather than lending them, and the reason the child's name is on the parcel, is that a book arriving in the post belongs to the child who opens it. Her father never owned one. And here is the part her father understood before he died in 2000. The children who receive those parcels have a name for the woman who sends them, and it is not Dolly Parton, because a great many of them are 2 years old and have no idea who that is. They call her the book lady, not the singer, not the woman from the television. The book lady because a book turns up with their name on it every month, and she is the person who sends it. Dolly Parton has said more than once, and in more than one decade, that of every title she has ever been given, and she has been given a very large number of them, including Queen of Country Music, the book lady is the one she cares about. Her father lived to see the program start. He died in 2000, 5 years in, when it was still operating in one county. A man who could not read his own name is the reason hundreds of millions of books have been posted to children who will never know why they arrived. Number 2. Avie Lee Parton, her mother. She was born in 1923 and died in 2003, and she had 12 children in a mountain cabin, and she is the reason Dolly Parton does what she does for a living. That is not sentiment. It is a straightforward statement about where the material came from. The music in that house was Avie Lee's. The old mountain ballads, the murder songs, the hymns, the story songs that had come down through the Appalachians from Britain and Ireland generations earlier and been changed on the way, sung in that valley by people who had never heard a recording of any of them. She sang them to her children while she worked, because that is what the work sounded like in a house with 12 children in it and no radio to fill the silence with anybody else's music. And one of those children was paying extraordinarily close attention. Everything in Dolly Parton's catalog that sounds like a story being told to somebody comes out of that room. And there is one object that makes the entry, and it is the most famous thing her mother ever did. The coat was real. A neighbor gave the family a box of rags. There was no money for a winter coat, and there were 12 children in the house, and Avie Lee Parton took those scraps, mismatched, worn, given away by somebody else because they were finished with them, and sewed them together into a coat of many colors for one of her daughters. And while she sewed it, she told the child the Bible story of Joseph, whose father gave him a coat of many colors because he loved him best. So the little girl walked to school in it, convinced that she was wearing something magnificent, because her mother had spent the entire length of the sewing telling her exactly that, and because it had worked. The other children laughed at her. They laughed because it was made of rags, and anybody could see that it was made of rags, and because children are children. And she has said that she could not understand it at first, because she genuinely believed she was rich. Dolly Parton wrote the song about it decades later, and she has said many times since that of everything she has ever written, and she has written thousands of songs, including the one at number 4 on this list. Coat of Many Colors is her favorite. That is a woman with 11 Grammy Awards, 3,000 published songs, and 100 million records sold, saying that the best thing she ever made was about her mother sewing rags together in a mountain cabin and telling a story over the top of it so that a child would not be ashamed of what she was wearing. Avie Lee Parton died in 2003 at 79, 3 years after her husband. She lived to see the song become one of the most loved things in American country music, and to see the Imagination Library start posting books out of the county she had raised 12 children in. Number 1. Carl Dean. The man almost nobody watching this has ever seen a photograph of. She arrived in Nashville in 1964. She was 18 years old. She had graduated high school the day before she left, the first person in her family to do it. And she had come straight out of the mountains with a set of cardboard suitcases and no money at all. On her first day in the city, she went to do her laundry at a place called the Wishy Washy Laundromat, and while she was waiting outside, a man drove past in a white Chevrolet and called out that she was going to get sunburnt. He was 22 years old, he was 6'2", and she was 5'0". His name was Carl Thomas Dean. He had been born on the 20th of July, 1942, and he ran an asphalt paving business with his father, which is the entire explanation for how tanned he was on the day she met him. She did not get in the car. Her own explanation of that decision is entirely practical and completely her. You have to know somebody first, or they might take you down a back road and kill you. She invited him to come to her aunt and uncle's house the following day instead. He did, and she would only sit outside with him, on the porch, where the family could see. And here is the line from her account of that first meeting that belongs at the center of this entry. she has said that while he was talking to her, he looked at her face. She noted, without elaborating much, that this was an unusual thing. She was 18 years old on her first day in a strange city in 1964. She had already worked out precisely what most men looked at when they spoke to her, and within a few years, she would build a substantial part of a public image around exactly that fact and make an enormous amount of money from it. And the first thing she noticed about the man she would spend the next 60 years of her life with is that he did not do it. He looked at her face while he was talking to her, and she found that surprising enough to still be mentioning it 6 decades later. They married on Memorial Day, the 30th of May, 1966, in a small ceremony in Ringgold, Georgia. There were almost no guests. Her record label had asked her not to marry at all, on the grounds that it would damage her prospects, and she did it anyway and told them afterwards. He was never famous, and he never once tried to be. Carl Dean gave essentially no interviews across 6 decades. Not selective ones, none. He did not attend the awards. He did not appear on the red carpets, or in the television specials, or in the documentaries, or in the magazine spreads that every other spouse in that industry appeared in, as a matter of course. For a long stretch of the 1970s and 1980s, there were people who genuinely wondered whether he existed at all. And in 1984, she told a Wire reporter that she would quite like to be photographed with him occasionally, just so that the world would know she was not married to a wart. And in nearly 6 decades of marriage, Carl Dean watched his wife perform exactly one time. Once. The most successful female performer in the history of country music. 60 years of shows, arenas, television specials, Dollywood, the Opry, Las Vegas. Something in the region of 10,000 performances. Her husband saw one of them. That is not indifference, and every account of the two of them makes that perfectly clear. It is a man who married a woman rather than a career, and who then declined, permanently, completely, and for 58 years, to have anything at all to do with the second thing. He listened to her records at home. He read what was written about her. He simply did not go to the shows. And she never once, in public, in 6 decades, suggested that this had been a disappointment to her. They renewed their vows in 2016 at 50 years in a small ceremony with a photograph she released herself. They never had children of their own. What they did instead was help raise several of her younger siblings. She was the 4th of 12, and there were a great many younger ones. And the nieces and nephews who came through that house gave her a name of her own. They called her Aunt Granny. He also inspired Jolene in 1973, which is worth stating because it is the other song everybody on earth knows. Jolene is a woman begging another woman not to take her man, and it was written by somebody who had noticed a red-haired bank teller taking a considerable interest in her husband. It is the most covered song in her catalog after the one at number 4, and it exists because Carl Dean went to the bank. Carl Dean died on the 3rd of March 2025 in Nashville. He was 82 years old. No cause of death was announced. The family asked for privacy, and this channel is going to give it to them, and there is nothing further to say about it here. What she said publicly was short, and she said it herself rather than through anybody. She said that words could not do justice to the love they had shared for over 60 years. And then she said the thing that ended up on every front page in the English-speaking world, that he was in God's arms now and that she was okay with that. 4 days later, on the 7th of March, 2025, she released a song she had written for him. It is called If You Hadn't Been There, and it went out 4 days after he died, which tells you it had been written before it was needed. They had been married for 58 years and 9 months, and they had known each other for 61. So look at the 5 of them together, because the shape of that list is the entire point of this video, and it is not the shape anybody would have predicted. A girl from the 3rd grade who is still there 70 years later, who carried the bags and did the hair and made sure she ate, and who quietly kept the archive that the Grand Ole Opry eventually put in glass cases. A man who made her famous, refused to let her go, sued her, and received the most valuable goodbye letter in the history of popular music. A father who could not read, and who is the reason hundreds of millions of books have been posted to children. A mother with 12 children and no money at all, who sewed a coat out of somebody else's rags and told a Bible story over the top of the sewing so that her daughter would walk to school proud of it. And a road paver from Nashville who would not come to the shows, would not be photographed, would not give an interview, and stayed for 58 years. Not one of those 5 people wanted anything from Dolly Parton's fame. Judy Ogle worked for her and carried her bags and archived her costumes and never gave an interview about any of it. Her parents were dead before the Imagination Library reached most of the countries it now operates in. Carl Dean would not be photographed, and Porter Wagner wanted something from her career rather than from her fame, which is a different thing, and which is why he sits at 4 rather than higher. That is the thing the list reveals, and it runs directly against what 100 million records would lead anybody to expect. She has spent 60 years surrounded by the most famous people on the planet. She has recorded with them, acted alongside them, been photographed beside them at every event the industry holds, and been genuinely close to a good many of them. None of them are on this list. 4 of the 5 knew her before there was anything at all to want. Judy from the 3rd grade, her mother and father from birth, Carl Dean from her first day in Nashville when she was 18 years old and had cardboard suitcases and no record deal. The 5th is Porter Wagner, and what he taught her, expensively, slowly, and eventually through a courtroom, was how to leave. That is arguably the single most valuable professional lesson of her life, and it is the reason she owns her own catalog, her own theme park, and her own name, in an industry that has taken all 3 off a great many women who came after her. And here is where she actually is. Dolly Parton is 80 years old. She lives in Tennessee. The last 18 months have been the hardest of her adult life, and she has been characteristically direct about it. In September 2025, she postponed her first Las Vegas residency in 32 years, saying she had been dealing with health challenges and that her doctors wanted her to have some procedures, and joking in the same breath that it must be time for her 100,000-mile checkup. When the speculation got out of hand that autumn, she recorded a video and told everybody plainly that she was not dying. In March 2026, she opened the new season at Dollywood, which was her first major public appearance in months. She told the crowd she had not been touring, as they knew. She said she had been worn down and worn out from grieving over Carl and from a number of other things arriving at the same time. She said she had needed to build herself back up spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And she said she had a few little health issues and that they were being taken care of. Then she told them that all is good and that it had not slowed her down. And she let everybody know, with the comic timing she has had since she was 21 years old, that she is not dating anybody, pointing out that if she turned up at the gates of heaven with another man, Carl would not be at all pleased about it. The Las Vegas dates are rescheduled for September 2026. The Imagination Library is still posting books out every month to children in 5 countries. Dollywood opened its 2026 season with her standing on the stage, and Judy Ogle is still there, 70 years on from the 3rd grade, and photographed with her on Instagram 10 weeks ago. And a woman who has been performing since she was a child in the 1950s and recording since 1959 is 80 years old, at home in the state she was born in, and still saying the same 5 names she has been saying her entire life. 4 of them never asked her for anything, and the one at the top saw her sing once and married her anyway, and stayed for 58 years. If this is the sort of thing worth half an hour, there is more of it on the channel every week.